And now, please join me in making some more noise and welcoming Eric.
And the closer the better. And I'll turn it down.
Closer the better, he says. Eric, Heroin addict. Thank you, Alex, and anybody who had anything to do with putting this thing together. Is that water right there, actually? Thanks. Man, what a cool little spot you guys have. I've gotten a chance to visit some different clubs around the country and a few around the world, and this one's special. Started in March 11th of 47. That's pretty fucking cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's warmer in here than I thought it was going to be. I'm from Phoenix, as we know, and so it was like 80 this week. And I got here and was completely shocked. I've been following the weather, and it was like 60 like a week ago, and I was like, oh, that's going to be nice. I got here and it was like 47 and blowing hail. Anyway, man, I love Heroin Anonymous. I love Seattle. I've gotten to spend quite a bit of time up here with you guys. And I love Heroin Anonymous. When I got sober, Heroin Anonymous was a year and a half old. And I got sober in Phoenix, where Heroin Anonymous was birthed. And the founder of HA, a guy named Paul F., was an interesting guy. And at the time I got sober, like the entire fellowship of Heroin Anonymous worldwide was smaller than the number of people in this room, if you can imagine that, right? Probably actually like half the people in this room. And it was a very strange and kind of a weird little place, right? So by that perspective, like looking back on that kind of time frame, like this is a lot of sober heroin addicts. You know what I mean? Congratulations, everybody that picked up chips. Congratulations, everybody that said they were new. Welcome. Welcome to the Sacred Insane Asylum of Heroin Anonymous. Anytime I'm around this many like sober heroin addicts, I like to think about all of the sad Pisces that are out there driving around in like Fred Meyer's parking lots, wondering where everybody went. So I like to have a moment of silence for those guys. Just kidding. Fuck those guys. Man, last year, 2022, 107,000 overdoses in the United States of America. 107,000, right? That equates to 293 a day, right? We flew into Seattle on a 737. A 737 holds 126 people. So last year was the equivalent of 2 737s a day going down and killing everybody on board, right? In overdoses. And if that doesn't get your fucking attention, man, then I don't know what does, right? There was a guy that came to a book study that's held in my house and has been for the last 17 years, who we just lost, overdose and died 2 weeks ago, and his name was Dylan P. So this talk's for Dylan. And I wish that was shocking. I wish man, fucking Dylan died. That's crazy, right? Like it's just not even crazy anymore. You know what I mean? It's just another one and another one and another one and another one. And the number of people that I know who've lost their life to this disease is just astronomical, you know? And so, and I know that that's the same for you guys. So anyway, so man, if 107,000 people of any other group other than junkies died, do we think that the cops would get involved? Do we think that the government would do something? Do we think that anybody would do something? Do you think there would be activists in the streets? There fucking would be. You know what I mean? But the fact is it was 107 people that are misunderstood by the people of this world, right? Like if you need more proof other than the 107,000 people that died, let's look at the fact that America has amassed the largest prison population on the planet attempting to incarcerate mental illness out of people, right? We lock up heroin addicts here, right? Thinking that, oh man, just another, a little stint in the joint will do it for you, right? And anybody that really understands mental illness knows that you can't incarcerate mental illness out of someone any more than, you could electroshock therapy out of it, any more than you could, I don't know, man, do a lot of other things, right? And so what I have to understand about being a heroin addict is that the world at large doesn't care and doesn't understand, right? And so who has to take responsibility for the disease, for the mental illness that I have is me. You with me? Because I'm the one that's going to suffer, and the people who love me. And so, man, I don't know. My story goes a little like this, right? So I walked through the front doors of Heroin Anonymous on Friday the 13th, January of 2006. It was 11:30 at night. There was a full moon outside, and I met you guys. I walked through the front doors of a treatment center, and I weighed about 45 pounds less than I weigh now. I was kind of a bluish, yellowish color. I hadn't been going outside during the daytime much. You could kind of see what was happening under my skin, through my skin, sort of thing, Everything I owned was in a duffel bag. My driver's license at that point in my life had been suspended for 17 years straight through, right? So this is a big year for me, right? So I've now been sober for 17 years, which is as long as my driver's license had been suspended at the time I got sober. So I feel like I've arrived, you know what I mean? I was tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I've been blacklisted from the banking institutions for depositing a few too many empty envelopes, if you know what I mean. And I was completely unemployable, fairly psychotic. I would regularly lose arguments with myself out loud in front of strangers, and was completely just full of misery and pain. And the only reason I walked into that treatment center is that a few days before, someone had offered me a way out, right? And so what that looked like for me was this. I remember Thanksgiving of 2005. I didn't know it was Thanksgiving in 2005. I was sitting in a dope house in the college area part of town. And I get a text message from my mom, man. And I was in a room that had tinfoil over the windows. I couldn't tell you what time of day it was. I didn't know it was the afternoon. And I got a text message from my mom that said, we're all getting ready to sit down to eat. Are you coming? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, it's Thanksgiving. And I don't eat food, right? Like, and so I'm like, no, I can't make it. And I just made up some shit, right? I was like, I'm out of gas or something. And she goes, well, if you can borrow some money from somebody, I'll give you some money to get back to them, right? Now, I'm 34 years old. Like, this is where I'm at. You know what I mean? And I just get straight with it, right? I'm just like, look, Ma, I'm just not gonna make it. I'm sorry, I love you. You know what I mean? And it broke my heart to say that to her. And the truth was, I probably could have borrowed some money. I probably could have made it, right? But the fact is again, I don't eat. I got no business at Thanksgiving dinner. And on top of that, I'm so full of shame, I don't want to look my own mother in the eyes. You know? And Thanksgiving goes by, man. And I can't tell you what happened in the middle, man. It seemed like a blink, but Christmas comes around. Now, you guys are like me, right? So I went to Mom's house, and you know why. To see what I could get, like any good junkie. Right. Yeah. And I walk into Mom's house, and she gives me what you give a good lifelong, like, junkie, drug addict, alcoholic, career criminal, which was a package of boxers, a package of socks, a gift card to McDonald's, and a gift card to Chevron. And the jig was up, man. There was no shiny shit to give to the dope man at the pawn shop. And I was utterly offended, like some sort of junkie blue blood royalty. And I was on my way out of my mom's house for being insulted in such a manner. And what happened, man, what happened was this. Now, so we're talking 2005, right? Like the internet doesn't really exist the way we know it now. Facebook doesn't really exist. I mean, we had MySpace, but people weren't posting their latest like sober epiphany on MySpace. You know what I mean? And so I knew nothing of recovery. I knew nothing of sobriety. I had never heard of sobriety. I didn't know you could get sober. I didn't know anything about it. Right? The anonymous programs are still very much underground, and I knew nothing about it. And so I'm on my way out of my mom's house, and this guy who I'd known to be a really horrible crackhead, who was my little brother's wife's dad. And he had retired. He'd been a businessman in town, had built a really successful business, had sold it, retired at, I don't know, 50-something with a few million in the bank. And upon retirement, he found crack cocaine, which that went exactly like you think it went, right? Like nothing but time on his hands, an endless supply of money, and this guy was like an overnight legend to me, right? Like he wasn't allowed to see his grandkids. He had taken like large sums of money and put it in every major bank so that he would never hit his teller limit in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? Fucking thinking. And and he would check into a hotel and he would get like 3 rooms, so you'd have less chance of finding him. You know what I mean? So like I said, legend, right? And so I'm on my way out of my mom's house after being insulted in such a manner. He rolls up on me and says something to me I'd never heard. And he says, you don't look like you're doing very good, which I thought, again, further insulting. And he says, look, man, he says, you don't have to live or die this way if you don't want to. He says, you can get sober if you want. And like I said, I'd never heard that before. I had no idea what that meant. I don't know what the word sober means to you today. But words, although they have common definitions, sort of mean different things to people, right? The word sober to me, prior to actually getting sober, was maybe the most awful word I knew of, right? What sober meant to me is that's what happens when the handcuffs go on. That's what happens when the handcuffs go on and I start to kick and the dope starts to come off and I start to sweat and my bones ache from the inside out, my skin doesn't fit, everything gets cold. And every thought and emotion I've been trying to get away from my entire life comes back to me, and it's just me on me like sandpaper, man. And that's what sober means to me at that point in my life, right? So he's like, you can get sober if you want. He said it all happy and shit, and I was like, man, that sounds great, but I'm super busy, gotta go, peace. And like you would have said. And I know that he prayed for me. I'm not a religious guy. I'm barely a God guy. But I know that he prayed for me, and here's how I know. Within 24 hours, I was hemmed up at a Home Depot for borrowing some things I had no intention of returning. And upon being arrested at the Home Depot, I was escorted down to our local county facility on what the state of Arizona says was my 20th incarceration. They found, at the time I was being arrested, enough methamphetamines on me to charge me with a felony 2 for distributing methamphetamines inside county jail. And they found that I was violated on a probation charge for possession of heroin. And I remember the arresting officer came back to me with this shard of methamphetamine. It was like a whole single shard, like one, like straight off the tree. It was a gift from a buddy of mine. That's the kind of people to give me Christmas gifts, unlike my mother. And is it right to talk about methamphetamines and Heroin Anonymous meeting? I'm not a specialist. If all you ever did was heroin, good for you. That's not my story. I like to do my heroin with stimulants, pretty much of any kind. I love cocaine. I love crack cocaine. I love methamphetamine. I also love benzos, barbiturates. I love LSD. Anybody ever shot ketamine? And I love Tennessee whiskey. And pretty much everything else. I'll tell you what, I never tried fentanyl, but I can tell you I love it. I can tell you for sure I love it. It just didn't have it, right? And so, anyway, so the arresting officer comes back to me with a shard of methamphetamine about this big, and he says, this is methamphetamine. And I looked at him like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, He says, if you tell me where you got it, I'll drop this down to a misdemeanor possession charge, and if you don't tell me where you got it, I'm going to charge you with a felony too for distributing methamphetamine in the jail. So what do you say? So I got another felony that day, and I came to. It was a day. That was the day after Christmas 2005, and I came to in January, man. I don't remember puking, sweating, shitting. I don't remember rolling burritos with the Pisces for New Year's. I just came to in January, right? And I guess we call that grace. I had kicked in that jail so many times I lost count, and that for whatever reason that time, I just came to in January, right? And I came to in January, and I looked around at all the other inmates wearing stripes and pink boxers, because that's what they do in our county jail, and pink socks and orange chocolates, and every other time I'd come to in that jail, I would look around at all these inmates and think to myself, man, what a bunch of fucking losers, I gotta get out of here, you know? And I would start spinning stories about how it's gonna be different, and making phone calls, and it's gonna be different this time, and here's a story, and here's what I'm gonna do, yada, 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 and that wasn't what happened this time. This time I looked around at all these inmates in stripes, and I thought to myself, I am you, and you are me, and there's nowhere to go. You know what I mean? And there's no point in spinning some story or hustle, because every road I know leads right back to where I am. You know what I mean? And if county jail isn't a part of your story, that doesn't mean that you don't still have that same place, right? I believe that anybody who would be at a place like this on a fine Saturday afternoon listening to a guy like me probably knows that place, right? Even if the doors physically unlocked from the inside, still being trapped and incapable of leaving. Even if that's the bathroom door with a child knocking on the door saying, "Mommy, I'm hungry," or that's the smallest, darkest room of any given building you're in, or whether that's just simply a prison of your own mind. Mine happened to be county jail. And man, I came to that day, and there was this voice coming from the middle of my gut, and it was clear as day. And for the last 8 years of my life up to that point, I have been a hope to die drug addict, you know? I wish I could tell you that like it just got bad at the end and I decided to get sober. I got bad at the end and the opportunity to get sober had happened. I mean, the truth is that I had been at my bottom for the last 8 years of my life. And the only thing different was somebody offered me a way out, you know? And there was this voice coming from the middle of my gut, man. It was clear as day, and it just said, "Dude, if you're not gonna die, please find a way to live, because this hurts," you know. And man, I had been actively like attempting to like find an escape off this prison planet, you know, or the prison of the mind I lived in, and I just couldn't seem to make it happen. I just kept coming to like a cockroach, right? And so there's this voice in the middle of my gut, and it's clear as day. It just said, "Man, if you're not going to die, please find a way to live." And I remembered what the guy had said, who told me there was a way out. And I called him, and he said if I could get out, come find him. I put my truck up for bail, which I'd kind of been living in, so it sort of left me residentially challenged. And I walked through the front doors of this treatment center on Friday the 13th, January 2006. Like I said, right? And so, man, I got here, and as I walked through the doors of that facility, man, I fell in love with you guys the day I met you, right? I knew the day I met you that I had been trying to find you my whole life. I had been trying to find you guys since the day I was born. I don't know about you guys, but I have my entire life been trying to find just one person that could tell me the truth about me. You know what I mean? Just one person, right? Like I can't tell you how many times like I would blow it and, you know, come to in county jail or the yard or, you know, whatever. And people said to me like, "Dude, what's wrong with you?" You know what I mean? Like, "Dude, what's wrong with you?" Right? And I don't know. You know what I mean? Can you tell me? Can you tell me what's wrong with me? I couldn't say, right? And when I walked into this room, right? This room, a few hundred miles away, I knew that you guys knew the whole truth about me. You know what I mean? I knew that my bullshit wouldn't fly here. I knew that you could see straight through me, right? And I knew by listening to you, by listening to your stories, that in some ways you'd been where I'd been, felt how I felt, thought how I thought, and that you weren't suffering that way now. And I did not understand it. It didn't make sense to me. My profanity scared off all the kids. Sorry. That's not the first time. Well, or the last. Whoever said that is a smart human. Man, I fell in love with you guys the day we met, right? And I mean that sincerely, not some like cliche, cheeky, gross. I just mean genuinely, right? Like I just been desperately trying to find anyone who could tell me the truth about me for so long. You know what I mean? While I watched every hope and dream I had gasp for air and drown in front of me, while I watched every good relationship I ever had die, while I watched the love and respect of my mother diminish, while I watched my whole life disintegrate in front of me, just trying to find one person that could tell me the truth about me. You know what I mean? And I walked into this room, and you guys told me the truth about me, right? And you guys introduced me to the 12 steps on the wall, and when I got here, I couldn't really read. Like I had done so much damage to my mind that I just couldn't comprehend. You know what I mean? It wasn't that I hadn't been to some school and even some college, and it wasn't that I didn't know how to read. Like I had damaged my own mind so badly, I couldn't read, right? And so it took me literally a couple of days in this facility to read through those 12 steps, you know? And what I came to the conclusion of, a couple of conclusions after finally being able to metabolize what that was saying. First conclusion I came to was that those 12 steps all made sense up until number 2.
Right.
And then they started to talk about God and higher power, and I was like, shit, I'm in the wrong place. Now, man, if you guys are inherently like religious people, God people, or, you know, like that if you had that experience before you got here, man, good for you, you know? That's not my experience. I had never had that experience. I didn't, and it's not that I had an offense to it necessarily. I just didn't have a connection to it whatsoever. You know what I mean? It didn't mean anything to me. And so when I read the steps on the wall, and it was like higher power this and God that, and I was like, man, this one more thing is not going to work for me. You know? But you had me at that first step, right? Like that thing that I'd been trying to, people have been like, dude, what's wrong with you? My whole life. And you guys described me in one strange little sentence with a dash in the middle, right? Powerless, dash, unmanageable. And that was the definition of my life. As much as I tried, as hard as I tried to change my life, to stop, to do something different, every attempt of mine failed. And my life, in fact, just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And the result of my efforts was just entirely unmanageable. You know what I mean? And what happened was this, right? Like the greatest gift I've ever been given was given to me, and that was that people just like me and just like you came into that facility and did the greatest solid that's ever happened for me, and that was this: that you guys came in and you didn't tell me anything about me. Right? You didn't tell me I was wrong. You didn't tell me I was broken. You didn't tell me I should change. You didn't tell me I was bad. What you in fact did is you just talked about you, right? Like you came into this facility and you just described, here's what you said. You described what it was like for you to have alcoholism, period, you know? And I heard myself in your story, right? So I'm going to tell you, in my own words, what it means for me to have alcoholism, right? In case there's somebody new or someone that hasn't heard that or hasn't had any experience with the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous or what have you, right? Now, so I got sober with the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in Heroin Anonymous, and other fellowships, right? If you have found something else that works for you, I love that and support that for you. I have found for me that the 12 steps works well for me, and I need not look a lot further. I've done some other stuff. I practice some Buddhist meditation, some Buddhist philosophy. I've done some outside help. I've gotten some EMDR because I have a lifetime of complex trauma, and I've done some other stuff, but I have found for me that the 12 steps in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous work quite well for me, right? And so It worked for me day one, and it still works for me today, and I'm still here in this process. And so, because of that, I love the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And so here's what I got for you, right? Is that the reason I refer to alcoholism in a Heroin Anonymous meeting is this: is that we use the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So. Prior to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous being published in 1939, there was absolutely nothing for people like me. If you had what I have, prior to 1939, there was absolutely nothing for you. You would maybe get locked up. You would maybe be stoned to death or burnt at the stake for being a witch, possibly lobotomies and electroshock therapies, or just incarcerated or left on a curb to die. You know what I mean? There was prior to 1939, there was absolutely nothing for people like me. And out of nowhere, in 1939, 100 alcoholics published a book. They didn't publish a book about what I should do or you should do. They simply published a book about what they had done, right? If you read the book, it's written in past tense, right? It's not about you. It's not about me. They wrote a book about what they did, right? And my experience is if I follow that book fairly closely, it goes well for me, right? And so the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous defines alcoholism as a threefold illness. Now, when I say alcoholism, I'm not really talking about alcohol. You know what I mean? When I say alcoholism, I'm simply talking about what the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous outlines in the first 164 pages. You with me? And so that condition describes me perfectly, right? And so the book describes alcoholism as a threefold illness. The first tenet of alcoholism it describes as a physical allergy, right? And so the physical allergy as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous goes like this, right? When you guys presented the allergy, you guys were like, yeah, it's an allergy. I went like, man, I've never been allergic to anything in my whole life. You know what I mean? But here's the thing, is if I look up allergy in a dictionary, it says this: an abnormal reaction to stimulus. And I went, oh shit. You know, because how I get loaded is quite abnormal, right? I remember New Year's Day 2000. I'm in my bed, and there's a chopper outside of my courtyard at my condos, and it goes like this: Eric Owen, come out of the house with your hands up immediately. And I did what you would have did, which is I put the covers over my head, and I thought maybe they'll go away. I was incredibly intoxicated, and I just went right back. And I don't know how long passed between, but not long later, I heard, Eric Owen, come out of the house with your hands up immediately, or we're sending in the dogs, right? And like, I don't like German Shepherds. And so I get up, there's the bong, there's a bottle of Jack, walk past the shotgun, I go outside. And man, was it popping out there, right? And like, I step outside, and there's a chopper, there's a mobile command unit, there are many squad cars, and there are the Mesa police in turtle suits with automatic weapons hiding behind cars and trees and door stoops. And I thought to myself, man, this is interesting. You know, like, how did I get here? You know? And now I'm not trying to allude to the idea that like I'm some tough guy or I do cool shit. Just big misunderstanding, really. But point being is this: radically different reaction than normal people. You know what I mean? And so when we talk about allergy in regards to alcoholism and substance abuse, substance use, heroin, etc., we're not saying like I break out in a rash or anaphylactic shock or hives or any of that. So here's what the allergy concept looks like for me, right? Is especially towards the end, man, I'm really trying not to blow it, right? Like my life's unmanageable, it's misery. I've known lives sober far worse than death, you know? Or I mean lives loaded far worse than death. And so especially near the end, man, I come to, and I don't know about you, but I come to an argument, right? Like I my eyes open and there's an argument in my head at the moment I gain consciousness. And the argument goes, when are we getting loaded? Anybody know that argument?
Yeah.
And man, I've had that argument my entire adult life. You know, like every waking moment I come to, my head goes, "When do we get loaded?" You know. And then I start negotiating with the terrorist. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. And it's either like right now, maybe there's something on the nightstand, or or maybe it's like, let's wait till lunch, or let's wait till after work, or that's probably not realistic. But I start this argument with myself, and I go back and forth with me and I, about this, like about, and I'm rationalizing about when and where and how and with whom I'm going to get loaded, right? And it's like back and forth, and the problem is that it just chews on me, man, until I cave, right? But especially towards the end, man, like I know, like there's damage, right? Like damage happens, people die, I get arrested, like I get homeless, like bad stuff happens. I'm really trying to keep like a lid on it, right? So I come up with some really reasonable starting place, and I'm like, man, maybe just like the corner of a Xanax, just like a little, like it's something reasonable, respectable, It's like just. Man, maybe just like this little corner of Xanax, right? That's a brilliant idea. You know what I mean? And so I take one little corner of Xanax, right? And here's how the allergy works. That little corner of Xanax needs 2 more. You with me?
Yeah.
Those 2 need 4 more. Those 4 need 8 more. You guys seem like you understand basic math and where we're going, right?
Yes.
That's the allergy concept. Simple, right? Simple. And you explained it in that way. And I went, shit, like that matches my experience exactly, right? Now, why I have to understand that as a physical reaction in my body, as the big book outlines it, is this, is if I have a physical reaction in my body, it rubs up against my main problem that I have had since day one becoming addicted, which is I believe deep down, one day, somehow, I will outsmart this motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like I'm a bright guy. I've solved some problems. I will think my way out of this problem, right? Anybody relate? Yeah. The problem is this: is that if it truly is a physical reaction in my body, it goes like this, right? So, I've been drinking this bottle of water since I started talking, right? I'm probably gonna finish it. What do we think's gonna happen after I finish this bottle of water?
You're gonna have to pee.
I'm my brilliant man right here. I'm gonna have to pee, right? Physical reaction in my body. Now let's say hypothetically, I think to myself, you know what? Every time I drink water, I have to pee. I'm tired of that shit. I'm not doing it this time. What do we think's gonna happen? I'm gonna pee anyway, right? Like I'm gonna piss my pants, right? Like with or without my permission. With or without my permission, I'm gonna pee, man, right? And so when we talk about powerlessness, for me, like I'm not powerless over alcohol. I'm not powerless over heroin. Those are inanimate objects, right? I'm powerless in 3 places for me in regards to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first is the physical reaction, right? I can't seem to take one without taking 2 more, 4 more, 8 more. You with me? Like without a multiplying, compounding effect. And so when you explained it in that way, I went, shit, right? It says this on page 23 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says on page 23, it says, the allergy concept would be academic and pointless if I never took the first one, setting in motion trains of circumstances. Therefore, the main problem for the alcoholic centers in the mind, right? And so if I have a problem that centers in my mind, what does that mean? That's a very inconvenient truth. Anyone? Mentally ill. Right? Like mentally ill. Like that's what it's implying. That's like a problem in my mind is a mental illness or disorder. There are a lot of people in here that are looking at me currently like, don't call me that. And like I'm sure there's somebody in this room like that's just thinking to themselves like that is a drastic overassessment of myself, sir. Thank you very much. And maybe that's true for you, right? But when you explained it in that way, it made a lot of sense to me, and here's why. So when we talk about mental illness in regards to alcoholism, right? And again, alcoholism, Heroin Anonymous, I will treat my alcoholism with anything I can get my hands on. Anything that I can put in my bloodstream that affects me from the neck up, I will treat alcoholism with, right? And so in regards to mental illness and alcoholism, alcoholism, the mental illness of alcohol doesn't mean I'm not lovable, right? It doesn't mean I can't add or subtract, or it doesn't mean, I'm going to kill your whole family. I mean, I might, but it probably doesn't have anything to do with alcoholism if that happens, right? When we talk about mental illness and alcoholism, for me it looks like this. My mom said to me once, I was about 3.5 years sober. I had just finished serving 2 probations concurrently. And it was the first time I had been off paper in decades, man. You know what I mean? And my mom said to me this. She said, Eric, you're not a dumb guy entirely. Can you explain to me how it is you've been incarcerated 23 times? Because I would sure love to understand. And if you're doing the math, you're right. I've been arrested 3 times sober, cleaning up things I did before I got here. And she said, can you explain to me how you've been incarcerated 23 times, right? And I felt sort of obligated to attempt to explain it to her because she bailed me out about half those, right? Now, again, as I started, she's a normie. She's not a heroin addict. She's not an alcoholic. She does not understand me, nor will she ever. No, regardless of how empathetic, how loving, how compassionate she may be, she will never truly understand me. My experience is quite different from hers, right? But she tries. And so I said this. I said, well, Ma, I said, the next time you go swimming, go underwater and hold your breath, And when you're down there and you run out of oxygen, don't come up right away, right? And when every fiber of your being begins to scream that if you don't get a gasp of oxygen fast, you might die. No, that's what it feels like when I need heroin. Anybody relate? You're fucked. That's not a normal human thought, right? Like, that's mental illness, right? And why I need to understand it that way is this, right? So all that sounds so perfectly normal to me, it doesn't sound unusual. You know what I mean? It sounds like the last time I was loaded, right? It sounds like so my experience, it doesn't sound unusual in any way, right? So let's take that mental illness and set it aside and try on any other mental illness you like. Let's try schizophrenia, for instance. Anybody ever known anybody that's schizophrenic? Yeah. Me too. I sponsor a guy that's schizophrenic. Just a wonderful, wonderful, sweet man that methamphetamine himself into schizophrenia. And my guy has schizophrenia so bad that what schizophrenia looks like on him is this. His voices start to talk to him, and they're the voices of the people he loves the most, right? The voices of me as his sponsor, his mother, his ex-girlfriend, the friends, employers, Jeff Bezos, and they all start to talk to him, and they all start to tell him that nobody loves him, and they all wish he was dead, right? And the voices in his head are so treacherous that the last time he had a schizophrenic episode, he was on top of a 4-story parking garage, and he was going to jump just to make the voices stop. You with me? Anybody ever got loaded with tears running down their face? I have. That sounds similar, right? What I know about my guy is that if he could decide to make those voices stop, he would decide that. You with me? It's not in his capacity to decide not to hear voices. You with me? That's what a mental illness is. And in that same way, it's not in my capacity to decide not to have the obsession for one more. You right? And so what I have to understand is that in that way, like that's a mental illness. I will never outthink that. You with me? Any more than I will beat myself in a game of chess. I can't tell you how many times, loaded, someone came at me for blowing it again and go like, what the fuck's wrong with you, right? And then I'm like, just back up, give me a minute, I'll figure it out. Just give me a minute, I'll figure it out. Anybody ever said that? Yeah. Dude, it feels so smart when I say that, right? Like, just give me a minute, I'll figure it out. I feel like I'm like owning it, you know what I mean? Man, what I'm saying to you is quite possibly the dumbest shit I've ever said in my life. You know what I mean? When I say, just give me a minute, I'll figure it out, I'm literally saying to you, just give me a minute, I think I can outsmart myself. Right? Just like, hold on, I think I could maybe outmaneuver my own reflection in a mirror, The truth is that good people like you and me get locked up, lose our lives, lose everything good about our lives, or just go on to the miserable end and die, trying to figure it out one day at a time. You know what I mean? And it doesn't work for me, right? And so, second place of powerlessness is there. So the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says this, third tenet of the threefold disease as the Big Book outlines it. It says this on page 64. It says, this wonderful, sweet little line. It says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, I will straighten out mentally and physically, right? And so what does that mean? So what that means to me is this. And so that is both the problem and the solution as I understand it, right? So that means this to me. I don't know what your first experiences were, what your first memories are of being on planet Earth with the rest of the humans. My first memories were this. I remember being a little guy, like that big, maybe, about 3 years old. I think it was probably younger than that. I remember being about 3 years old, and I remember being in the presence of my own mother, who I know loved me very much. And I remember being completely incapable of feeling the love that she had for me, right? And I don't know what it was, but there was a wall between us. I remember at that age feeling like the black sheep. I remember at that age feeling like a square peg trying to fit in a round hole. I remember at that age feeling alone in a room full of people, and it didn't matter who was in the room, right? And that's how I came into this world. That was at 3.5. What I didn't know at 3.5 is that my father had left before I was born. What I didn't know is that my mom was about to marry my stepdad, who would raise me as a drunk and violent man with one leg, and I was really glad I could run faster than him. That's a joke. You can laugh if you want. Not a very good one. What I didn't know is that I would fail kindergarten. What I didn't know is that I would have 3 concussions before I was 10. I would be hit by a car. I would go temporarily blind. What I didn't know is that I would give myself my first tattoo in the 6th grade, right? And that I would find the magic elixir at the age of 11 and started getting loaded, you know, on the booze, the pills, the weed, the codeine syrup, and huffing gas, like most 11-year-olds, right? And so when we talk about the spiritual malady, for me, man, it's this brokenness I've carried around my whole life that I have no ability to process, you know? This absolute, like, desperate, broken emptiness that lives in the middle of me. And what the book's suggesting is simply this, right? That when that brokenness is gone, the obsession doesn't come back. And if the obsession doesn't come back, I don't take the first one. And if I don't take the first one, I don't take 1,000 more, and I don't burn my life to the ground, right? Very simple. And when you explained it in that way, I looked back at those steps, man, and I thought maybe, you know, they don't really make sense to me. I don't really understand it, but maybe. And what happened for me was this, is I started at 1 and I went to 12, and somewhere between 1 and 12, the magic happened for me, right? And the magic that happened for me was this, is that the thing I'd been looking for in the bottle, in the bag, in the needle, and the pipe for all those years happened to me in those steps, right? And it looked like this. Somewhere between 1 and 12, the thing that happened to me, I explained to you without words. It went like this. You know, like my skin fit for the first time in my life. Like I could fully inhale, I could fully exhale. Like my gut wasn't in knots, my heart wasn't palpitating, my mind wasn't racing. You know what I mean? I felt okay being where I was, doing what I was doing for the first time in my life. You know what I mean? Without a substance in my body, and my life changed, right? And what's interesting to me still to this day is that nothing changed, but everything was different. You with me? The world didn't change, man. Something from the inside out changed, and my whole reality changed, right? And so I knew the day I got here that if I left out any part of those steps, I wasn't going to make it, right? I know that I'm not a casual user. I'm not a part-time alcoholic. I'm not a sometimes, junkie. I knew the day I got here and that you guys presented that to me, that if I wasn't all in, I just probably wasn't going to make it. You know what I mean? And so I don't know about you, but the amount of damage that I caused prior to getting here was extensive. You know what I mean? The people I'd hurt. It's like this, right? Like there were periods of getting loaded where, like there was a period of time where I just drank belligerently. There's a period of time where I just did a lot of heroin. There's a period of time where I did a lot of acid. There was a period of time where I did a lot of coke and whiskey. There was a period of time where I did a lot of methamphetamines. And like, what's interesting about all those periods of my 23 years of being loaded is that each one came with like a special kind of like damage I created. You know what I mean? Like on the booze and the coke, I hurt a lot of people. On the methamphetamine, I stole everything that wasn't burned down, bolted down. And I mean, fortunately, on the heroin, I just didn't move much, so that was cool. But I knew when I got here, man, that the amount of pain that I experienced was largely in proportion to the harm I had caused, and the guilt and shame of what I had become and the way I lived propelled how it was that I got loaded for a long, long time. And I knew when I got here that if I didn't clean that stuff up, man, I wasn't going to get to stay. You know what I mean? I knew if I didn't take the amends process seriously, like it just wasn't going to work out for me, right? And so I remember the first time I wrote my first inventory, and the first line item on my inventory was this. It was at my father for leaving, never come to find me, right? And so I remember sharing that with my sponsor, right? And I share with him, yeah, you left, never came to find me, and my sponsor stops me, right? And he's like, dude, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 34. What's that have to do with anything, you know? And he goes, so you're a grown-ass man, right? And I was like, yeah, you know? And he goes, you ever go find him? And I was like, no. And he goes, well, that makes you a hypocrite then, right? And I was like, oh, I see how this may go, you know? And man, line item by line item by line item, that man broke my stories down one by one and robbed me of the ability to be a victim, right?
Yeah.
And he says to me this, he says, I think you should find your father and make amends to him. And I'm like, I never met him. What am I going to make amends to him for? And he goes, yeah, I heard your story, right? He says, every shitty thing you've ever done, you blamed on him, right? That if you grew up that way, you'd live this way too. He says, I think you should find him, let him know you're all right, and that it wasn't his fault, right? That you were a drug addict and blamed it all on him, in which case he was right. Man, I wasn't too warm to that idea initially, right? He was like, I think you should find your father, make amends to him. I was like, yeah, right. But man, here's what happened in Heroin Anonymous, right? Is I got here, and you guys said, give me all your money. Now that's a metaphor, of course, because when I got here, I had no money. But what that metaphor looked like initially, you guys said, give me all your money. What that really looked like was like, come back to another meeting, maybe consider, getting a big book, right? And you said, give us $2, come back tomorrow, we'll give you 4, right? And what that $2 looked like was come to another meeting, get a big book, right? And so I gave you the $2, came back, and you gave me the $4 you promised, right? And you said, give us the $4, come back tomorrow, we'll give you 8, right? And what that looked like was like, maybe consider getting a sponsor, maybe consider the steps, right? And so I gave you the 4 and came back tomorrow, and you gave me the 8, right? And you guys said, give us $8, come back tomorrow, we'll give you 16, right? What that looked like was like, finish the steps, maybe get a home group, maybe a service commitment. And what happened was this, is over time, man, like your word to me was so incredibly immaculate, and that everything that you had ever promised me would come true, came true so perfectly, that in not very long, it didn't make sense for me to argue with you anymore, right? Like every single thing that you said was absolutely perfectly true. And so at some point, I just went, man, like for me to argue with you, I just feel stupid, right? And so I became willing to find this man, track him down and make amends to him. So at 35 years old, I tracked down a man I had never met, my father. And then the day I find him, he'd been turned over to hospice a week before with a week to live. Wow. And so my father was a bull rider on the circuit when he knew my mom. I don't know if that makes my mom like a rodeo groupie or what. But I tracked down my father on his last day of life. And my perception of this man I've never met is he's probably an awful human being, probably going to die, alone in a tiny hotel on the west side, like broken and destitute, right? And that's not true. I find him. He lives in a big house on the far west side, some ranch property, and he's surrounded by a bunch of people who clearly love him. I walk inside this house, and there's a bunch of people like looking at photos and telling stories to each other, clearly surrounded by a lot of people who loved him, right?
Awesome.
And I had this realization, man, that nothing I believed about him was true, but that everything I believed about him, I became.
Oh, wow.
And as I walk up alongside of this hospital bed where he's at, there's a hospital bed with the back jacked up, and it's overlooking this picture window of this horse property. And as I walk up alongside of this bed, I see this hand, and it's my hand, only dying. Never seen my father's hand before. And as I walk up a little closer, I see his face, and he looks exactly like me, only dying, right? And I could see his eyes a little bit, I'd never seen my father's eyes before. And I'd often wondered, what he looked like. Now I don't believe that he didn't know. There was no conversation to have with him, right? Like he's on, fentanyl, morphine, all my favorite things. But I do believe on the unseen plane that he knew I was there, right? And so there's no verbal amends to make to this man, but I knew in that moment, like I could see a golden thread linking all of the events of my life, right? Like I could see every bit of pain and experience that I ever had leading to the moment I got sober, right? From like my father leaving and never coming back, my stepdad being drunk and violent, failing kindergarten, failing out of high school, all my own failures, raising a daughter I found out in a DNA test, the custody case wasn't mine. All the pain I ever collected was absolutely necessary to break me down far enough so that when I got here I could hear you, right? And without any bit of that pain, I don't think I make it. And so I could see a golden thread linking all of those events, and I could see a golden thread linking the events of my sobriety that had led me right there to that moment, and I believe for sure that I was meant to be there, right? Like I've tracked my father down on his last day, and the day I become willing to find him, he's been turned over to hospice a week before with a week to live, right? Now, I don't know what God is, man. I still don't. You know what I mean? My best definition of it is what Native Americans call it, which is the great mystery, right? It says everything I need to know. It's great, never gonna understand it. And there's this chest on the end of this bed, man. I sit on this chest and I just stare at this man. This man who I had swore to God most of my life I was stabbing the neck with a rusty screwdriver if I ever got the chance. And here he was, man, just that most humble place a human being will ever be, right? Like his last dying breaths. And I have I have this realization that this man had never done a thing to me, right? Which begged this revelation, which is that it's not what happened to me that ruins my life. It's what I believe about what happens to me that ruins my life. You with me? Because he had never done anything to me, but the beliefs I had about a man I had never met had absolutely destroyed me, right? Which begged this revelation, which was that reality is relative, man. And I get to pick. If I want to have a good day, I'm having a good day. You can't argue with me. If I'm having a bad day, I'm having a bad day, and you can't argue with me, right? And that reality is subjectively relative, right? And that I had in many ways, by my own reality, created my own demise. And that I now was empowered with the ability to choose the reality I wish to have moving forward. And man, I forgave this man for everything that had ever happened in my life, and I forgave him for everything that had never happened in my life, right? Just carte blanche, I just forgave him, right? And in that forgiveness, man, I forgave the whole world, right? Like the Mesa Unified School District, Every ex I had ever had, every cop, every jail, all of it, man. I just forgave the world for all of it, right? I went home that night, and it was the first night I slept in 15 years that I didn't grind my teeth in my sleep. I woke up the next day, I got a call that he died after I left. And that's what happened in Heroin Anonymous, right, in that work. And so I still today don't really have a clue as to what God is, but I'll tell you that when I do those steps and I just show up for my own life, man, some sort of magic happens for me. You know what I mean? And that's about all I need to know. And so, man, I'll tell you, today is wild, right? So, like, my life today, when I got here, man, I heard people say, like, I've heard a lot of people say some really ridiculous shit in Heroin Anonymous in 12-step meetings, you know? And if you're new, just because someone with some time said it doesn't mean it's true. I would research it in the book and see if you can find it, you know what I mean? And if you can't find it in that book, I don't know, questionable. Man, I heard a guy when I first got sober in a meeting say this, right? What'd he say? He said, my best day sober is better than my worst day loaded. And like I thought, yeah. So my best day sober is better than my
Worst day sober is better than best.
It's so fucked up. I can't even. Like, it's like, what? Listen, man. Like, if you made it to this leper colony and didn't enjoy the ride, like, we're not the same. You know what I mean? I had some incredible times getting loaded, right? Like, I had some incredible. I got nothing against the institution. Thank you, sir, for correcting me. I have nothing against the institution of being loaded. Man, I also heard this guy in a meeting once, right? Like, say that we were like I was brand new, man. I was straight out of street, man. I was in the Alano Club in Phoenix, and this old guy, man, like pulls up in like a car, like tires didn't match. He's like chain smoking, you know what I mean? And like just looked like he was gonna die tomorrow. And he's like, it was like, I live a life better than anything I could have ever dreamed, right? And I thought to myself, man, you are a shitty dreamer. You know what I mean? Like, I think you could do better. You know what I mean? In my short-sighted couple of months of sobriety, that was my thought, right? But what I'll tell you is this, is that, man, I don't know, and I'll never know, like, what that guy had going on the inside. You know what I mean? I live a life today, both internally and externally, greater than anything I literally could have ever dreamed. You know what I mean? At 9.5 years, I completed all the amends there were to make. I tracked down all of the people there were to find. I gave them back their money, told them I was wrong. I mean, all the way back to like beer runs I did in high school, right? And at 3.5 years, I dropped 3 money orders into a mailbox near a house I bought, which were the last dollars or words I owed to anybody on the planet, man. And you want to know what high feels like?
Yeah.
Get there, right? We talk about like this self-forgiveness thing in the rooms a lot, right? Like, oh, just forgive yourself, right? And like, I don't have the ability to decide to do that any more than I have the ability to decide not to get loaded, for me, you know what I mean? But I'll tell you what, when all the amends were made and I knew that there wasn't anybody left to make it right with, there wasn't anything left to be angry at myself for, right? And today I passed the mirror test, you know? When I see my own reflection in the mirror, I go, dude, you're all right, you know what I mean? Like, you did what you could, you know what I mean? And what I know today as a result of you guys and this life that we get to live is that I will leave this world better than I found it, you know what I mean? And so will you, right? And so, man, today, like I live this wild ass life, right? I'll tell you this story and shut up. I started a business some years ago. If you ask me, you know, how, like it turned out wildly successful. If you ask me why or how, I don't think I'm particularly brilliant, right? Like I didn't finish high school. You know what I mean? I will simply say that I learned what I practice in rooms like this in business, and that people in business are unusually shocked by honesty and integrity. and the business has gone really, really well. I own a house. I don't have a boss. I wake up, I meditate, I walk down the hall, let my dogs out of the kennel, make some espresso, start my day, go to the gym, come home, work for a little while, go to a meeting, start over, right? Like, I don't have any adult supervision in my life, right? And somehow, like the wheels, it doesn't come off the tracks, you know what I mean? I just stay here and do this with you guys, and my life gets greater and greater and greater, right? Man, in the last 2 years, I have been in an incredible number of countries. I just got back from Amsterdam and Sweden. Before that, I was over in Thailand. Earlier last year, I was in Greece. Before that, I was in. I chased sharks in the ocean, and I was over in the Red Sea diving, and I came out of the Red Sea and went to Cairo, right? And in Cairo, there's the Great Pyramid, you know what I mean? Which the Great Pyramid is literally nothing more than the largest, most known, oldest grave site in the world, right? Like the Great Pyramid is a grave monument, right? And so I go into the Great Pyramid, right? And like right in the middle of the Great Pyramid, there's this chamber. And inside the chamber, in the middle of the Great Pyramid, like 45,000-year-old tomb, is this granite box, right? Where the granite box where they kept the sarcophagus in for like 4,500 years. Now, Egypt is a bit like Mexico, right? Like, it's a civilized country. You can buy your way out of things. And so I bribed this little Egyptian guy to let me lay down in the granite box where like the oldest, largest grave in the world is, right? And then I lay down in this granite box inside the Great Pyramid, and like some magic warmth rolled over me that like I can't describe to you. But I thought to myself this, like, man, 17 years ago, I couldn't leave my fucking block. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get here? You know what I mean? And now, I didn't share that story with you guys because I think I'm special or I want to make you jealous. I think that story is available to every single person here, right? I think every single person here that wants that dream, it's yours, man. I hear people say, again, the weirdest shit. I hear people say in places like this, you know, oh, this is the last house on the block for me. Dude, this isn't the last house on the block, man. This is the first thing that ever worked for me. You know what I mean? Yeah. This is not a dead-end street, man. This is an on-ramp to a freeway that goes anywhere you fucking want it to go. Yeah. And if it wasn't for people like you in places like this, I would have killed a man I never met. Me. Thanks for my life. Yeah.